continuation of Chapter 1, The River of Life. The Wellington plantation was only half the size of the Devlin's plantation. It was in Thomasville, Georgia, and the plantation was known for their cotton, pecans, and Georgia pines. Wellingtons profited from sales of cotton, and even more selling wood from these Georgia pines. They also had numerous pecan trees which surrounded the main house, and people traveled long distances just to get a croaker sack full. I used to say I left the jungle and went to the forest. For the first couple of years on the Wellington plantation, I did not speak. I just worked in the fields, either picking cotton or pecans off the ground. The slaves and overseers thought I was crazy. They even checked my mouth and throat several times to see if there was damage or if I even had a tongue. No matter what they did to me, I did not speak, but at night, when all the other slaves were asleep, I would write poetry with a stick in the patch of red clay by my bed, and careful to erase the words before dawn. Writing in the red clay, feeling the texture with my hands, was the only way I felt human, connected to the earth. I learned to read and write, of course, from the Devlin plantation if I didn't learn anything else, but I also knew that slavery was illegal and no one needed to see me read, and definitely not write anything down in that red clay. I did have one friend that was about my age, and her name was Maya. She knew that I wasn't crazy, just heartbroken. As we worked together in the fields, she would talk to me about everything: the trees, the weather, her life, life of the other slaves, secrets of the big house. She knew all the gossip on the plantation and the other plantations. How could someone so young know so much about everybody's business? I would also think to myself, Maya was very pretty. Her eyes were a distinguishing green like the leaves in the flowers. She was about my complexion, but she walked with a limp, dragging her right leg. The rumors were that she was mauled by the master's dog, and her mother was shot and killed while trying to rescue her. Maya's mother hit the vicious dog with a stick, so it would release Maya, and was killed for striking the master's dog. Maya talked about everything, and I mean everything, but that. I wish she would have talked about it, because besides being young slave girls, our mothers risking their lives to save ours was one more thing that tied us together. But maybe the memory was still too painful. I know that I cried many of nights missing Mama and NEFE. Still, it was like talking with Maya was a way to release nervous energy. Maya consistent talking reminded me of a blue jay in the nest, baby birds by my cabin, that start singing at the break of dawn and still chirping at dusk when I turn from the fields to go to bed. Maya's chirping was really getting on my very last nerve. She was always talking about everything on the plantation. Finally, I looked at her and said, Maya, would you please hush? The other slaves were shocked, but she just laughed and laughed. I knew you would come around. I just knew you would, she said. Afterwards, I became the talker, telling Maya about my story and even teaching her to read and write. At night, she would sneak in my cabin and I would write her lessons in the red clay. But later she began to tell me about her brother that lived in the main house and was a servant to the master's son. She mentioned that he also wanted to learn how to read and write and asked me would I teach him. The slaves didn't have to work on Sunday, so the following Sunday, Maya and her brother Elijah and some of the other slave children came to my cabin. At first I thought that he was white because he was so fair, and his jet black straight hair, well, that didn't help. His eyes were as blue as the sky on a clear day, and he had the keenest features. Yet, what was really about him was his demeanor, which illuminated such kindness and sincerity. I just couldn't help but like him. He was the first man that I ever looked directly in the eyes, and there were definitely sparks there. I grew up and fell in love with Elijah. I called him Eli. Now, he was rumored to be the master's son, and the older he got, the more evident that became. From my understanding, our master had plenty of children that was on the plantation that was his blood. And sometimes it seems as if he was treated worse than us field slaves, especially by the mistress of the house. I could imagine every time she looked at him it was a constant reminder, because he was the spitting image of his father. Well, I taught Eli how to read and write. Shakespeare, of course, Romeo and Juliet, his favorite. And he would always say this line to me: Adaline, Adaline, wherefore art thou Adaline? Deny thy master, take thy name, and no longer be a slave. He would tease me with that line all the time. Eli knew that I loved writing, and one day he brought me a new brown leather bonded diary. I was praying he wouldn't get lynched for that, because he never told me where he actually got it from. I wrote in the diary everything that ever happened to me, to us, and even named it Nefertiti after my sister. Writing my words in the diary named after NEFE was my special way of keeping her alive in my heart. I kept my diary hidden in a stone behind my bed and covered with cloth and with the red clay. I was about 16 when I got pregnant from Eli. He was only a year older. He saw me every chance he got. He said that when you have my baby, we're gonna run away and be a family. But in the month of November, it was colder than normal. It rained all the time and snowed frequently. The frozen limbs on the trees became so heavy they crashed the roof of the main house and several of the slave cabins. The freezing weather also killed the produce, which made food even more scarce, and many of the slaves that worked the fields became ill, several catching smallpox, and 2 of the slave children froze to death because of the harsh winter. I was 7 months by then, and I lived only to see Eli. But the last few days he came around. He was coughing uncontrollably. He was pale, spotted, the same symptoms as the other slaves. A few days later, his sister Maya visited me and told me that Eli was weak, and the doctor felt that he needed to stay bedridden. Although I desperately wanted to see Eli, I didn't want to take a chance with the baby. The last day of November, Maya came into my cabin. The last time someone looked at me like that, her name was Hilda, and she was the one that told me that my sister NEFE died. November 30th, 1864. Elijah Wellington, the father of my twin girls, died of smallpox. I loved him dearly. This was the only sentence Adaline wrote in her diary until the twins were born. Heartbroken once more, I never thought I would love again until I laid eyes on the girls. They were born on January 1st, 1865, a few moments after midnight. They looked just like their father, pale and pink with a head full of curly black hair. But they both had NEFE's eyes, my mother's eyes, my eyes. They looked the same, but I couldn't even tell back then what was really going on with them. You see, one was a little feistier than the other. I named the feistiest one, the oldest, Eloise, by a few minutes, and I will call her Eli after her father. I had no idea the second one was even coming. But moments later, there she was. I named her Lillian and called her Lily after my favorite flower that represented to me beauty and grace. Eli gave me a silver locket of a heart before he died. He said it was his heart, the only valuable thing he owned. I had one of my friends divide the heart in half and carve an A and N on the back of both pieces, named for my mother Alangi and my sister Nefertiti. I placed a necklace around each of my daughters' necks so they could have a part of their father, aunt, and grandmother. February 16th, 1865. One night Maya came to my cabin. She told me to hurry and gather my things because we had to flee the plantation. I stepped outside and fire and smoke was everywhere. The weather was cold that night, but the land was dry and the winds flamed the fires that engulfed the mighty Georgia pines. The families of the Wellington plantation were already gone, and so were the slaves. I grabbed my girls, wrapped them up as tight as I could, stuffed food and the diary around my waist, and Maya and I escaped the night right outside the woods. There was another slave waiting for us with a wagon filled with other slaves, and we were all terrified, shivering with fear and coldness, hoping not to be discovered. We'd hovered like birds in a nest for two reasons: to keep warm and not to fall off that wagon. February 20th, 1865. We have been here for days, but I'm too tired and it's too cold and dangerous to travel. Where would I go anyway? I am so worried about my girls, and they are so young. I keep Eli and Lily close wrapped up in my clothes next to my heart, hoping not to smother them. But thank goodness for the Rivers. If it wasn't from their church, I don't know where our slaves would have went.